He was a cold billionaire father, until a simple waitress stole his daughter's heart. It all began on what seemed like an ordinary day, when Spencer Caldwell lost his daughter in the middle of Manhattan's bustling streets. The billionaire, a man used to controlling entire empires, suddenly felt life slip right through his fingers, until Lily was found by a young waitress, Savannah Brooks, who offered her nothing more than a simple cup of hot chocolate and a gesture of kindness. From that unexpected encounter, a bond was born, one powerful enough to change not only the little girl's future, but also her father's heart. Subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The afternoon sun reflected off the tall glass buildings of Manhattan, while the traffic and constant honking created the city's familiar soundtrack. Among rushed executives, tourists snapping photos, and street vendors calling out to passersby, one scene stood out from the general haste. Spencer Caldwell, one of the most powerful men in real estate, walking hand in hand with his young daughter. Lily, just 4 years old, clutched her stuffed bunny tightly, dragging it across the pavement without caring about the dirt. Her curious eyes followed every detail around her, from toy-filled shop windows to a food cart selling pretzels. Spencer, in his immaculate suit, was juggling his packed schedule with the attempt to be a present father that day. The family's governess, who usually cared for Lily during the week, was sick, leaving him with no choice but to bring the child along. The stern expression of the executive contrasted sharply with the delicate innocence at his side, forming an unusual picture in the middle of the concrete jungle. As they walked, Spencer's phone vibrated in his jacket pocket. He answered almost instantly, without even checking if Lily was still close by. On the other end, one of his trusted directors delivered bad news about a multi-million-dollar deal that was on the verge of collapse. The tone was urgent, and Spencer, used to keeping everything under control, raised his voice to give sharp and precise instructions. For a brief moment, he let go of his daughter's hand to adjust the leather briefcase slipping off his shoulder. Without the steady grip she was used to, Lily drifted toward the sound of distant music coming from the corner, probably a street musician playing guitar. Her small steps carried her away in seconds. When she turned and couldn't spot her father's familiar face, she stopped, clutching the bunny against her chest, her stomach tightening. The crowd felt enormous, and fear made her eyes brim with tears. Spencer ended the call abruptly, satisfied with having solved the immediate issue. But as he turned, he realized his daughter's small hand was no longer in his. His blood ran cold. "Lily?" he called softly, trying to keep calm, though his frantic eyes scanned every face around him. There was no sign of her. His heart pounded wildly. He pushed through the crowd, barking, "Excuse me," as he shoved past people with his shoulders. The man who ruled entire empires now felt powerless at the thought of losing the only person who truly mattered. He kept calling her name, but the noise of cars and chatter drowned his voice. Every second felt like an eternity, and the silence of her absence only magnified his panic. His breathing turned uneven, and the trademark chill of his executive demeanor gave way to sheer, unfiltered fear. Meanwhile, Lily wandered with uncertain little steps. The music had already faded into the city's clamor, but her instinct made her follow a man in a gray suit who walked briskly. To her, he looked like her father, and the hope of finding him again led her to step through the open door of a busy restaurant. Inside, the warmth contrasted with the cold wind outside. Lily stopped near an empty table, confused and frightened, clutching her bunny as if it were her only protection. Customers chatted loudly, waiters balanced trays, but no one seemed to notice the small child standing alone in the middle of the dining room. Her eyes darted across the sea of unfamiliar faces, searching for her father, until fear finally overcame curiosity and tears welled up. That was when Savannah Brooks, a young waitress, noticed her. Carrying a tray of plates, she spotted the little girl standing frozen, lost in the crowded space. Savannah was in her early 20s, working there to pay her bills and saving every tip like it was gold. Still, her attention wasn't limited to demanding customers. There was a softness in the way she looked at people. She set the tray down on the counter, walked over slowly, and crouched so she'd be at the child's eye level. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked gently, careful not to frighten her further. Lily didn't answer right away, just pressed the toy against her chest. Savannah kept her smile, a simple but warm smile, the kind that offered safety without words. The contrast was striking. Amid the rush and indifference of adults, there was this young woman who actually saw the child. Savannah extended her hand carefully, not to touch, but to give her a choice. "Would you like to sit with me for a little while?" The girl blinked away her tears and, after a few hesitant seconds, nodded timidly. Savannah guided her to a corner table, asked a colleague at the counter for hot chocolate, and pulled out a chair so Lily could climb up. While the cup was being prepared, Savannah struck up a light conversation. She asked about the bunny's name, complimented the little floral dress, and mentioned the music she might have heard outside. Little by little, the tension in the child's small shoulders began to fade, and her frightened eyes softened into a shy trust. At that moment, Savannah had no idea who the girl was or that a desperate man was scouring the streets outside for her. She only knew one thing: she had to care for her, because no child should feel alone in a city that big. The cold wind bit at Spencer's face as he hurried down the sidewalk, almost running, pushing his way through the crowd without caring about the image of the imposing executive he usually projected. His suit, normally flawless, was now rumpled from the jostling and his frantic pace. His phone still buzzed in his pocket, but he ignored every notification, incapable of thinking about business at that moment. His mind repeated one single thought on a loop: find Lily. Every corner felt threatening, every unfamiliar face an obstacle. He called out for his daughter, but the city gave him no answer. In desperation, he scanned honking drivers, slow-moving pedestrians, and the open doors of restaurants blending into the busy streetscape. A suffocating dread pressed into his chest, the real possibility of losing her consuming him more than any failed deal ever could. Inside a nearby restaurant, Savannah kept the little girl close, trying to distract her with the hot chocolate that had just been set on the table. Lily held the cup in both small hands, blowing gently at the steam, her eyes fixed on the waitress with a mixture of relief and confusion. The stuffed bunny rested in her lap like a shield against the world. Savannah, seated across from her, spoke softly, asking about her favorite colors, noticing how little by little the child began to relax. Still, her gaze drifted repeatedly toward the door, as if she expected to see someone walk through at any moment. Savannah had no idea that, just outside, a desperate man was searching for that very look. His soul consumed by fear. Spencer finally stopped in front of the restaurant, his heart pounding as his eyes swept the dining room. The room seemed to spin around him until, in the corner, he saw the sight: Lily, seated across from a young woman in a simple uniform, her cheeks flushed from the warm drink, her eyes focused on their conversation. Relief hit so strongly, his legs almost buckled. He crossed the space in long, fast strides, ignoring the curious stares of the customers. When Lily recognized him, she let out a muffled cry of joy and leapt from her seat, running straight into her father's arms. Spencer lifted her from the ground with force, holding her so tightly it was as if he could fuse her small body to his own. He kissed her hair again and again, while tears kept in check for years by sheer self-control quietly filled his eyes. Savannah watched in silence, her posture easing, though her eyes remained fixed on the intense reunion between father and daughter. A faint smile crossed her lips, not of pride, but of simple relief at seeing the little girl safe again. When Spencer finally lifted his head, Lily still resting against his shoulder, his gaze met hers. In his eyes was a mix of disbelief, relief, and the shadow of a man who had just stared down his worst fear. He stepped toward the table, where the cup of hot chocolate still let off steam, and, with his voice heavy from emotion, spoke quietly. "I thought I had lost my daughter. I've never felt so desperate." Only then, taking a deeper breath, did he turn to Savannah, trying to regain composure. "How did she end up in here?" The waitress answered calmly, explaining that Lily had wandered in alone, confused and frightened, and she had simply wanted to make her feel safe until someone came. Spencer was silent for a long moment, absorbing her words, acutely aware of the vulnerability in having entrusted without choice the most precious part of his life to a complete stranger. As the tension began to ease, Lily nestled against her father's shoulder but still reached out her small hand toward Savannah, as if unwilling to part so soon. The gesture surprised Spencer, who realized that, in just a few minutes, this young woman had earned his daughter's trust in a way he rarely witnessed. Savannah gently brushed her fingers across the child's hand and said softly, "You're safe now, sweetheart." The contrast between the rigid executive and the humble waitress had never been clearer, as if two distant worlds had been forced together by fate. Still hesitant, Spencer offered a brief thank you, though the look he gave Savannah carried a mix of respect, curiosity, and something even he couldn't define. The restaurant manager approached, asking if everything was all right, and Spencer answered curtly, confirming only that it was, unwilling to share more. He didn't want to expose his failure in front of strangers, but deep down he knew he would never forget the feeling of almost losing his daughter, or the fact that a young waitress had been there to prevent the worst, holding Lily's hand. Now, with renewed firmness, he prepared to leave, but the little girl insisted on turning back to wave at Savannah. "Bye," she whispered, her small voice pulling a genuine smile from the waitress. Spencer pressed his lips together and led his daughter outside, but the innocent gesture remained etched in his mind. He wasn't aware of it yet, but that encounter was about to change the course of their lives. The walk back to the street was quick, but Spencer didn't take his eyes off Lily for even a second. She remained in his arms, her face buried against his shoulder while the stuffed bunny swung from side to side. The cold air hit him the moment. They stepped outside, but he hardly felt it. The warmth of holding his daughter against his chest was the only thing that mattered. Still shaken, he placed her carefully in the back seat of the car the driver had waiting at the corner. Before closing the door, Lily stretched her arm toward the restaurant entrance and waved at Savannah, who was still inside, watching with the same calm smile. Spencer followed the gesture, standing still for a moment, torn between the urgency of taking his daughter home and the undeniable impact that stranger had just made on their lives. Without a word, he got into the car and let the driver take them back to the mansion. That night, Lily refused to sleep alone. She called for her father again and again, clutching her bunny and begging him to stay beside her. Spencer, who usually left this responsibility to the governess, had no choice but to sit at the edge of the bed and come up with an improvised story. The little girl finally drifted off, her tiny fingers tangled in the sleeve of his shirt, and he sat there for a long time, watching the calm rhythm of her breathing slowly replace her tears. The silence in the house felt heavier without the familiar presence of the governess, still resting from her illness. For the first time in a long while, he faced fatherhood without any support, feeling firsthand the weight and the meaning of that role. The few hours of sleep Spencer managed to get weren't enough. When he woke early, as usual, his schedule was already filled with commitments, yet none of it seemed as important as what had happened the day before. During breakfast, Lily came downstairs in her pajamas, dragging her slippers across the marble floor, the stuffed bunny still in her arms. She sat quietly beside him, then began talking with the natural ease of a child about the nice lady who had given her hot chocolate. Spencer listened silently, noticing how the memory lit up his daughter's eyes. That surprised him more than any signed contract ever could. Lily rarely spoke so fondly of strangers, and the fact that she mentioned Savannah with such affection stirred in him a mix of gratitude and curiosity. Lily's mentions of Savannah continued throughout the day. During every break, while eating or playing with colorful blocks on the living room carpet, she kept bringing up the lady with the hot chocolate. Spencer tried to change the subject, but it always circled back. He couldn't ignore it. He knew their lives didn't allow for many outsiders, that their routine was carefully managed and controlled. Even so, he couldn't overlook the way his daughter seemed lighter since the encounter. He decided he should at least thank the young woman properly for looking after his child. A formal gesture, but one he felt was necessary. Late in the afternoon, he instructed his driver to take him back to the restaurant. He had no desire to draw attention, only to step inside, find the waitress, and thank her. The place was busy again, the usual rush filling every corner. With his characteristic executive posture, Spencer entered and scanned the room. He spotted Savannah from behind, balancing a tray stacked with plates. He moved closer, and when she turned around, their eyes met for the first time in full awareness. Savannah seemed surprised to see him there, but she kept her professional composure. "Good evening, sir," she said in a neutral tone, unsure of what to expect. Spencer drew a deep breath, the formality of the moment clashing with the intensity of the memory from the day before. He didn't waste time on long explanations. His voice was steady, though carrying a trace of emotion he couldn't disguise. "Yesterday, my daughter came in here scared. You took care of her. I needed to thank you." Savannah stayed quiet for a few seconds, receiving the words with the calm acceptance of someone who hadn't expected recognition but understood its weight. Before she could respond, Lily tugged at her father's sleeve and pointed eagerly at the waitress, her face lighting up. "It's her!" she exclaimed, stretching out her small arms toward Savannah as if to reach her. The sight of the little girl's joy stood in stark contrast to her father's rigid posture. Spencer looked at his daughter, then turned back to Savannah with a measured expression. "It seems my daughter would like to see you again." Savannah arrived at the imposing Caldwell mansion shortly after sunset, guided by the driver Spencer had sent to pick her up. The ride itself had already been unsettling enough. She was used to crowded subways, noisy buses, and narrow streets, not sleek black cars with tinted windows and leather seats. When the iron gates opened, revealing the illuminated facade of the house, a nervous chill spread through her. The contrast between her simple life and that display of luxury was overwhelming, and for a brief second she wondered if she should have refused the invitation. But there was no time to hesitate, because as soon as she stepped out of the car, Lily came running from the front entrance, dressed in a pale puff-sleeve dress and clutching her inseparable stuffed bunny. "Savannah!" the little girl cried, throwing herself into her arms as if they had known each other forever. That kind of welcome swept away any trace of nervousness, and Savannah knelt down on the stone floor, hugging the child who beamed from ear to ear. Spencer watched the scene from the doorway, his hands in his suit pockets, his expression more relaxed than usual. He didn't interfere. He simply allowed his daughter to express herself freely, mentally noting the natural ease of the moment. Lily rarely showed such enthusiasm for people outside her immediate circle, yet here she was, completely at ease. Savannah, meanwhile, retained her usual simplicity. She wore a modest skirt, a light blouse, and a worn-out coat that betrayed her life as a waitress. And still, There was a grace about her that contrasted with the marble floors and stained glass windows of the mansion. When she finally stood, holding Lily's hand, Spencer stepped forward. "Good evening. I hope the ride was comfortable," he said politely, though his steady gaze revealed more than the formality of his words. Savannah responded with a small nod, thanking him for the kindness, while Lily tugged at her hand, eager to lead her inside and show her the world she lived in. The entrance hall was stunning, with towering chandeliers and walls adorned with classical paintings. Savannah walked slowly, taking in every detail, though the sense of not belonging clung to her. Lily, however, didn't give her the chance to hesitate. She pulled her straight to the living room, proudly displaying her toys scattered across the rug. "Look, Daddy bought this for me," she said, pointing at a dollhouse, before dragging her toward a half-finished puzzle. Savannah knelt down again, helping her place a piece with patient care. Lily's laughter filled the room, so spontaneous it echoed down the corridors, catching the attention of the governess who appeared at the doorway. Still recovering from her recent illness, the woman was taken aback by the sight. A simple young woman sitting on the floor, fully engaged in play, while the child radiated a joy that hadn't been seen in a long time. Her eyes shifted from Savannah to Spencer, who gave a subtle lift of his chin, a silent assurance that everything was under control. Dinner was served earlier that evening, at a table far too long for just 3 people. Spencer took his usual seat at the head, but he couldn't help noticing what unfolded beside him. Lily insisted that Savannah sit by her side, and the waitress, though hesitant, eventually gave in. The governess kept a watchful eye from a distance, but did not intervene. Savannah lacked the refinement of a high society guest, yet there was something genuine in her every gesture, breaking bread into smaller pieces to help Lily, testing the soup before blowing gently on the spoon to feed her, laughing at the exaggerated face she made when tasting a dish far more elaborate than she was used to. Spencer, who almost never allowed laughter at the dinner table, found himself disarmed by the lightness. He didn't comment, nor did he openly smile, but he noted how much livelier his daughter seemed with Savannah there. After dinner, Lily continued tugging at Savannah's hand, showing her every corner she deemed important. The bedroom with pale walls, the shelf full of children's books, the window overlooking the garden. Spencer followed at a safe distance, quietly observing. Each moment revealed something about them both. Savannah, patient and genuinely engaged, kneeling down to listen carefully to every childish explanation, and Lily, radiant, proudly sharing her little world with someone new. When they approached the illuminated garden, Spencer finally intervened, his voice calm. "It's getting late." Lily protested, but eventually gave in, still holding Savannah's hands tightly. The goodbye was difficult, the girl pleading for her to come back soon. Savannah, touched by the request, simply promised she would try. When the driver dropped her back in her neighborhood, Savannah walked slowly away from the car. The mansion lights still glowed in the distance, a stark contrast to the modest streets. Around her apartment, her mind held on to the memory of Lily's tight embrace and Spencer's steady, watchful eyes, always controlled, yet filled with an intensity he never voiced. For Savannah, it had only been a visit. For the little girl, it had felt like the highlight of the week. As she climbed the narrow staircase to her building, Savannah couldn't help but ask herself what exactly that family expected from her from now on. Still, she pushed the thought aside and took a deep breath, reminding herself she had an early shift at the restaurant the next day. Across the city, Spencer tucked Lily into bed, and the last word whispered by his daughter before drifting off wasn't Daddy, but Savannah. Spencer reorganized his routine with the same objectivity as always, but this time there was something different behind the decision. For years, he had been known as the man who never allowed himself to miss a single commitment at the company. He showed up at the office every day, led meetings late into the night, and turned work into an extension of himself. But after the day he nearly lost Lily in the middle of the street, he realized that some things needed to change. He decided that 2 days a week would be reserved for working from home. From the library, surrounded by files, reports, and contracts, he would hold all his meetings via video conference. The remaining days were kept for the company headquarters, where he could still embody the image of a present, uncompromising leader. This balance seemed temporary, but necessary. It allowed him to stay closer to his daughter without abandoning his responsibilities as CEO. Lily was the first to notice the change, and she celebrated it as if it were a holiday. At just 4 years old, she didn't quite grasp the idea of schedules, but she quickly understood that on some days her father would be more available. She ran down the mansion's halls, clutching her stuffed bunny, announcing that she wanted to show him her drawings, tell him made-up stories, and listen to his voice. Spencer, even buried in his work, felt her constant presence in the house, and that nearness affected his focus in ways he hadn't expected. They weren't direct interruptions, since the governess made sure Lily didn't barge into his office, but her laughter carried through the garden, down the halls, and into the library, slipping past its heavy walls. Even when he refused to take his eyes off the monitor or the files before him, he felt something shifting inside, as though he were beginning to realize that there was life beyond figures and decisions. Despite these changes, Lily's routine remained limited. She spent her days at home with the governess, who split her time between household duties and caring for the child. Lily didn't complain, but her every gesture revealed the same persistent wish to see Savannah again. The waitress had become an unexpected reference point in her world, and her name was mentioned constantly. At breakfast, Lily talked about the hot chocolate. At snack time, she recalled their playtime on the rug. And every night, before bed, she asked her father to let her see Savannah once more. Spencer listened silently, without irritation, but he kept track of her insistence. Each request reminded him of that terrifying day in Manhattan and of the overwhelming relief he felt when he found her safe in the restaurant. He didn't want to admit it, but he knew that this simple young woman had already earned a place in his daughter's heart, something neither wealth nor discipline had managed to achieve. To meet Lily's requests, Spencer began searching for alternatives. On some nights, after finishing work at the office, he allowed the driver to take him to the restaurant where Savannah worked. These weren't long or planned encounters, just small moments he granted his daughter. Lily would rush to the waitress, showing her a drawing she'd made, inventing little stories and laughing under Savannah's genuine attention. And Savannah, despite her long shifts and demanding customers, would crouch down to the child's level, listen carefully, and respond with patience before hurrying back to work. Those short moments were enough to make Lily happy, but they also exposed a problem. Savannah had a fixed job, with strict hours, and she couldn't simply be available whenever Lily wanted. The limits of that arrangement became clear each time. Spencer watched his daughter leave the restaurant holding back tears, asking for more time than was possible. One afternoon, while Spencer worked from the library, he glanced out the window and saw Lily running in the garden. The governess struggled to keep up with her while still trying to juggle the other demands of the mansion. The image caught his attention. It wasn't that the woman lacked dedication. She was simply stretched too thin, divided between caring for Lily and managing the household. Spencer returned to his video meeting with executives, but the thought lingered. He knew he could hire more staff to ease the pressure, but that wasn't what Lily had been asking for every day. She didn't want more employees. She wanted someone specific, a presence that had given her comfort in the middle of chaos. That realization stayed with him into the evening, when he knew he could no longer ignore the issue. At dinner, Lily brought it up again. She wanted Savannah for playtime, for drawing, for hot chocolate. The governess, patient as always, tried to explain that the young woman had another job and couldn't just leave the restaurant whenever she was called. Spencer cut his steak silently, hearing every word, knowing deep down that the explanation wouldn't satisfy his daughter. After Lily went upstairs to bed, the governess approached him with her usual respectful tone, but this time more direct. "Mr. Caldwell, perhaps there's a solution. If Miss Brooks were hired to care for Lily full-time, mornings and afternoons, I could devote myself exclusively to running the household. The girl would have the attention she needs, and you would have peace of mind." Spencer set his silverware down and remained still for several seconds. The suggestion didn't sound out of place. In fact, it seemed the most practical step. He could offer Savannah a salary far higher than what she made as a waitress, perhaps double, ensuring she would accept. That night, he gave no answer. But as he sat alone in his office, the idea turned over and over in his mind. Maybe it was time to turn improvisation into decision. The next morning, Spencer Caldwell left the house early, not for the company headquarters, but for a meeting arranged at the restaurant where Savannah worked. He had spent the night turning the governess's suggestion over in his mind, weighing pros and cons, reflecting on the impact such a change would bring not only to Lily, but also to the daily rhythm of the mansion. The man who was used to making multi-million-dollar decisions in minutes now found himself hesitating over a proposal that reached into the most personal part of his life. When he walked into the restaurant, dressed in his usual flawless suit, he drew discreet glances from both customers and staff. Savannah, balancing a tray of coffees, froze for a second when she saw him. She hadn't expected to see him there in the middle of the morning, much less with that steady, purposeful gaze. Her heart raced without fully grasping what was about to happen. Spencer didn't choose just any table. He asked the manager to arrange a private space in the back and waited in silence until Savannah appeared, clearly uneasy about stepping away from her shift, but told to do so by her superior. When she entered, he stood immediately in unusual gesture for a man so accustomed to being served rather than to greet others. "I need to talk to you," he said, his tone clipped but not harsh. Savannah frowned, adjusted her apron, and waited. Spencer drew in a long breath before continuing. "My daughter talks about no one but you. With each passing day, I realize that your presence gives her something this house alone can't provide. That's why I want to make you a different kind of offer." The silence that followed felt heavy, but Savannah didn't look away, despite the surprise written all over her face. He then laid out the idea with the same clarity he used in front of investors. "I want to hire you to care for Lily full-time, mornings and afternoons. You wouldn't have to worry about trays or long shifts anymore. In exchange, you'd receive a salary far higher than what you earn now, double, maybe more. You'd have stability, transportation guaranteed, and you could devote yourself exclusively to my daughter." Savannah needed a few moments to process those words. This wasn't just a job offer. It was a complete change of life. The restaurant, exhausting as it was, paid her bills. And here was a proposal that could give her security and conditions she had never imagined. Still, she couldn't bring herself to answer right away. I don't know what to say," she murmured, staring at the floor before finally lifting her eyes back to his dot. Spencer held his ground, but without arrogance. "You don't need to give me an answer now. Think about it. Talk to whoever you need to. Just know this, my daughter needs you, and I need the peace of knowing she's with someone I can trust." His voice didn't waver, but the rare sincerity, and it cut through his usual formality. Savannah felt the weight of those words more than she cared to admit. For the first time, she realized that this powerful man wasn't speaking as a CEO, but as a father. She swallowed hard, drew in a breath, and gave a small nod, promising she would think it over. Spencer didn't push her. He simply straightened. his jacket, and before leaving, added, "When you've made your decision, I'll be waiting." The sound of his firm footsteps lingered in her mind long after he had left the restaurant. Back on the floor, Savannah tried to fall back into her rhythm of work, but her head was spinning with what she had just heard. She felt torn between the relief an opportunity like this could bring and the fear of stepping into a world that wasn't hers. Her coworkers noticed her distraction and asked if she was all right, but she brushed them off with short smiles, hiding the turmoil inside. With every plate she served, she thought of Lily's face, of the laughter in the garden, of the way the little girl had hugged her with absolute trust. The idea of officially becoming part of that routine scared her and drew her in at the same time. When her shift ended, she walked the busy streets of Manhattan slower than usual, as if every block was another chance to reconsider the answer she would give. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Spencer carried on with his usual composure, reviewing reports, joining calls with directors, but his mind kept circling back to the morning's meeting. Waiting wasn't in his nature, least of all waiting on someone else's personal choice. Yet, here he was, no longer in control. Lily played in the living room with her stuffed bunny, and every so often she would ask if Savannah was coming. Her father would just stroke her hair and change the subject, but he knew he couldn't stall forever. The weight of all the days. Negotiations felt insignificant compared to the uncertainty now filling his home. This time, Spencer Caldwell wasn't waiting for a signed contract. He was waiting on the decision of a young waitress who just might redefine his daughter's future. Savannah left the restaurant that night, walking slower than usual, clutching her bag against her chest as if trying to shield herself from the doubts spinning in her mind. Spencer's invitation echoed over and over, each phrase replaying in her memory as though it had been etched there. The cold Manhattan air stung her face, but what truly made her shiver was the weight of a decision that could change her entire life. When she reached the small apartment she shared with her older sister, she was greeted by the smell of simple soup simmering on the stove and the clatter of dishes being washed. Clara immediately noticed something different in her expression, and with the ease of someone who had always shared confidences, asked what had happened. Savannah hesitated, but eventually recounted in detail the morning's meeting, describing not only Spencer's words but also his expression, the seriousness in his voice when he spoke of his daughter, and the way he offered terms far beyond anything she had ever imagined. Clara listened quietly, leaning against the sink without interrupting. When Savannah finished, she exhaled slowly and wiped her hands on a dish towel. "That's an important offer," she said, meeting her sister's eyes. "You need to think carefully. It's an opportunity that could change your life, but it will also change the way you live. Working in a mansion, taking care of a child, spending every day with people very different from us. It won't be simple." Savannah nodded slightly, still hugging herself as if seeking comfort. She thought of the exhausting shifts at the restaurant, the tips she scraped together to pay bills, and compared it to the possibility of stability, fixed hours, and a much higher salary. Yet she also thought of the risk of stepping into a world where she didn't belong, surrounded by rules and expectations she might not know how to meet. The next morning, the work at the restaurant felt heavier than ever. Orders piled up, demanding customers complained about trivial details, and the manager pressed her for speed with an impatient look. Savannah did everything as usual, but her thoughts wandered every time she bent to wipe down a table or balanced a tray. She remembered Lily's face, the way the little girl hugged her without hesitation, as if she already belonged in her life. That contrast unsettled her. On one side, the tiring routine with no future. On the other, the real possibility of changing not just her job, but her role in someone's world. A role filled with responsibility, but also a kind of affection she never found in the dining room full of impersonal voices. When her shift ended, she lingered at the door, breathing deeply, as if each step she took afterward was a choice. At the company headquarters, Spencer maintained the rhythm everyone expected of him. Long meetings with directors, reviews of investment reports, phone calls about million-dollar figures. His tone of voice remained firm, his decisions precise, and his team still saw the same unshakable CEO. Yet behind that facade, there were moments when his eyes drifted off the screen, his mind elsewhere. While signing contracts, he remembered Savannah's serious expression at the restaurant. While hearing numbers, he thought of Lily's laughter when she was with her. He fulfilled every responsibility, but an uncomfortable truth grew stronger. The outcome of this proposal did not depend on his authority or his experience, but on the choice of a young woman who barely knew his world. At the mansion, Lily kept repeating Savannah's name. She asked the governess to play chocolate shop, made up stories where the waitress appeared as a character, and saved drawings she insisted she wanted to show her. The seasoned governess knew this wasn't just a fleeting whim. One night, while tucking the girl into bed, she told her employer, "She needs this presence. Mr. Caldwell, it's not just affection, it's peace of mind." Savannah gave her something none of us have managed. Spencer didn't answer immediately, only closed the bedroom door and stood still in the hallway for a moment. The woman's words echoed, confirming what he already sensed. It was a decision. He couldn't delay much longer. Savannah spent that week torn between doubts and memories. Her sister's advice echoed in her thoughts. The exhausting hours at the restaurant sharpened her sense of fatigue, and the memory of Lily's bright smile brought an inexplicable comfort. She felt caught between fear and courage. She didn't want to rush into anything, but she couldn't pretend nothing had happened. By Friday, she knew she had to give an answer. She put on her uniform, tied up her hair, and went to work as on any other day. But deep down, she carried the certainty that the conversation with Spencer was inevitable. As soon as her shift ended, she found the driver waiting, and her heart began to race. The silent invitation to make her choice had arrived. As she climbed into the car, the streets of Manhattan seemed longer than ever, and the only clear thought she carried was that once she reached the mansion, she would no longer be able to avoid her own words. The car slid through Manhattan's bright avenues before leaving the busy streets behind and entering a quieter area lined with imposing mansions. Savannah stared out the window, trying to steady the anxiety that grew with every mile. The memory of the restaurant Spencer's firm, direct tone mingled with the sweet image of Lily running into her arms, and her heartbeat quickened. When the vehicle stopped before the Caldwell residence's iron gates, she drew in a deep breath, adjusted the plain uniform she still wore, and stepped out with careful steps. The driver led her to the entrance, where the governess greeted her with her usual formality, though her eyes revealed something more, the expectation of someone who already knew this meeting would change the course of many things. Inside the mansion, the rooms were vast and sober, lit by chandeliers that cast golden reflections across the walls. Spencer was waiting in the living room, standing without his jacket, his tie loosened, and his shirt sleeves rolled up. His stance was still that of a man used to being in control, but tension lingered in his shoulders. The moment Savannah entered, he turned at once, dispensing with formalities. "Thank you for coming," he said in a low but steady voice. She gave a small nod and remained standing before him, waiting. For a few seconds, the silence between them spoke louder than words, until Spencer continued, "My offer still stands. You don't need to answer right now, but I believe you've had enough time to think. What have you decided?" Savannah took a moment before she spoke. Her eyes traveled across the luxurious space, the elegant furniture, the thick carpet, until finally meeting his. "I've thought about it a lot. I spoke with my sister. I weighed the risks, the changes, and I also thought about how I felt when Lily hugged me, when she called me by name as if I had always been part of her life. She took a deep breath, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I'll accept your offer. I want to take care of her. But you need to know, I'm not like the people here. My life is simple. I'm simple. All I can promise is dedication and honesty." Her words hung in the air, direct and unembellished. Spencer absorbed them without interrupting, his eyes intent, as though assessing every detail of a negotiation. He stepped forward, leaving no room for doubt. "That's exactly what I want. Lily doesn't need protocols. She needs someone she can trust, someone who will be there." The seriousness in his tone made clear that this was not a matter of convenience, but a deliberate choice. The governess, still near the door, inclined her head slightly, pleased to see the ideas she had suggested days earlier coming to fruition. Savannah, still uncertain, drew in a breath and let a small smile slip, timid but genuine. Spencer extended his hand as if sealing a formal agreement. She hesitated a moment, then clasped it firmly, feeling the weight of the decision. This wasn't just a new job. It was a new role in a house she barely knew, alongside a child who had already stirred her affection. Just then, hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway. Lily appeared in a light nightgown, hair loose, running towards Savannah with the stuffed bunny in her hands. "You're here!" she exclaimed, throwing herself into her arms. Savannah knelt to embrace her, forgetting for a moment the tension of the conversation. The girl chattered non-stop, telling her about the day, her games in the garden, repeating excitedly that now they could spend more time together. Spencer watched in silence, arms crossed, allowing only a slight softening in his expression. The decision had been made, and his daughter's joy confirmed that he had chosen the right path. The house, long defined by rigidity, seemed to gain a new atmosphere, lighter, warmer, brought to life by that simple embrace in the center of the room. When Savannah left the mansion later that night, the driver took her back to her apartment with clear instructions. She would return the next day, not as a guest, but as part of the household. Gazing out the car window, her heart swung between apprehension and hope. The restaurant, with its long hours and endless fatigue, was now behind her. Ahead lay an uncertain future, surrounded by luxury and rules she didn't know, but also marked by a genuine bond with a child who had already captured her heart. Across the city, Spencer climbed the mansion's staircase and stopped outside his daughter's room. When he opened the door, he found Lily asleep, clutching her bunny, a smile still on her lips. He closed the door softly, fully aware that from tomorrow on, nothing would ever be the same. Savannah's first day as a nanny began early, when the driver picked her up outside the modest building where she lived. She carried a small suitcase with clothes and a few basic belongings, her heart racing at the thought of her new reality. Upon arriving at the Caldwell mansion, she was greeted by the governess, who led her through the halls, explaining the household routine with crisp efficiency. Meal times, Lily's preferences, basic care, and the spaces she was allowed to use. Savannah listened carefully, fully aware that she wasn't just taking on a job, but stepping into a world completely different from her own. With each detail explained, the feeling of being out of place grew stronger, but it took only the sight of Lily running toward her to ease her doubts. The little girl threw her arms around her, laughing as if she had been waiting a lifetime for that moment. Mornings quickly turned into a time of discovery. Savannah joined Lily in play, helped her build with blocks, read children's books, and even improvise little puppet shows. Spencer, closed away in his office, could hear the laughter drifting through the house. He didn't join them, but felt a quiet relief in knowing his daughter was happy. The governess, in turn, used the time to focus on running the household, finally freed from the constant responsibility of keeping watch over the child. Gradually, the house settled into a new rhythm. Lily was calmer, less prone to outbursts, and even her meals became more regular. Spencer noted these changes from a distance, mentally recording the practical results of his decision, though he never admitted aloud that the outcome had far exceeded his expectations. Within this new routine, Spencer and Savannah began interacting more often. At first, there was only brief exchanges, questions about Lily's behavior, comments about schedules or activities. But as the days passed, unexpected moments arose. One afternoon, Spencer walked into the living room and found Savannah helping Lily draw. He stood watching for a few seconds before remarking that his daughter seemed more creative than before. Savannah replied easily, explaining that the girl just needed encouragement. The simplicity of her answer stayed with him. He was used to grand solutions and million-dollar investments, but here was a young woman of modest background showing that sometimes the essentials came from the simplest things. That contrast intrigued him more with each passing day. At night, when the house grew quiet and Lily was already asleep, Savannah had time to reflect on her new life. She sat in the room given to her, taking in the elegant furniture that clashed with her simplicity. She thought about the family she had left behind, about the exhausting restaurant shifts, and wondered if she had made the right choice. But then, she remembered Lily's smile, the joy on the little girl's face every morning when she arrived, and she concluded that she was exactly where she needed to be. Her feelings toward Spencer remained mixed, his rigid posture, his direct way of speaking, but there was also respect. She saw that beneath his cold exterior was a father trying to protect his daughter above all else. That realization helped her face the days ahead with less fear and greater resolve. Time slipped by faster than Savannah realized. Between playing in the garden, telling stories before naps, and brief conversations with Spencer, her bond with Lily grew stronger every day. The girl no longer wanted to play alone, called for her constantly, and even slept more peacefully when Savannah put her to bed. For the governess, the change was undeniable. The house, once heavy with silence and routine, now felt alive with the young woman's presence. Spencer, always observant, recognized that hiring her had not only been the right decision but an essential one. Even so, he kept his distance, careful not to blur the lines of professionalism. For him, her role was defined. Savannah was now part of the household structure, with clear responsibilities. Yet the ease with which she moved through the mansion and the affection she showed Lily was already beginning to challenge that definition. Within just a few weeks, the new routine had settled in, yet inside it small moments began to reveal deeper layers in the relationship between Savannah and Spencer. One rainy afternoon, the power went out for several minutes, plunging the house into darkness. Frightened, Lily ran into Savannah's arms, and the young woman soothed her with a soft lullaby. When Spencer came downstairs to check the problem, he found them sitting on the sofa, his daughter nestled against the nanny, her eyes half closed under the comfort of the song. He stood there for a few seconds, watching until the lights came back. He said nothing, only offered Savannah a brief, grateful look before returning to his work. That simple moment stayed with him. For the first time in a long while, he had seen his daughter face her fear without prolonged sobbing, held steady by a sense of safety. Over time, Savannah grew more confident in her role. She began suggesting new activities for Lily, short walks in the garden, painting sessions outdoors, even small adventures into the kitchen to make simple cakes under the governess's supervision. Spencer, from a distance, quietly authorized each idea, testing the limits of what he was willing to allow. Within his home, with every smile on Lily's face, he acknowledged that the young woman brought more than companionship. She brought balance. The contrast between the rigid atmosphere of the mansion and the lightness of their interactions became more striking by the day. Yet Spencer did not abandon his role as a vigilant father. He asked the governess about Savannah's conduct, checked. Whether she kept to her schedule and scrutinized every detail, as if needing constant reassurance that he still held control. Savannah, meanwhile, began to see nuances in Spencer she hadn't noticed before. She realized that beneath the businessman's exterior was a man marked by solitude. He spent long hours in his office reviewing documents, yet in his rare pauses, he appeared to watch his daughter play. His expression in those moments was different, softer, less guarded. Without intending to, Savannah started to understand that this rigid man was not just her employer, but someone battling emotional limits he didn't know how to overcome. The realization left her conflicted, because while she respected his space, she increasingly felt she was part of something larger than just a job. The governess, ever observant, noticed the changes as well. In quick conversations, she remarked that Lily seemed more balanced, that laughter once again echoed through the corridors, and even the staff appeared less tense. Savannah's presence had become part of the household rhythm, and ignoring it was no longer possible. One evening, as Spencer prepared to retreat to his office, the governess approached with an unexpected comment. "She's brought peace into this house, Mr. Caldwell. I don't know if you've noticed, but even you seem lighter." He didn't reply, only closed the folder in his hands and walked away in silence. He didn't want to admit anything, but he knew there was truth in her words. For Lily, there was no distinction anymore. To her, Savannah was inseparable from her world. She called for her when she woke, asked for her during play, and insisted on her presence when it was time to sleep. Spencer saw the bond deepen but did not view it as a threat. On the contrary, he began to understand it as something positive, a way of filling the emptiness that had long weighed on the house. Still, he didn't allow himself to fully lower his guard. There was a distance he insisted on keeping, an invisible line between the professional and the personal that, however fragile, had to exist. Savannah respected that boundary, but deep down she felt the days were slowly weaving an inevitable closeness. That week, an unusual request came. Lily asked her father if they could all have dinner together in the smaller dining room rather than the grand hall. Spencer, who rarely allowed improvisation, agreed. The scene was simple: a smaller table, modest dishes, and a child between two adults laughing at every detail. Savannah helped Lily cut her food, told her little stories, and Spencer watched in silence. For a brief moment, the mansion stopped being just a space of luxury and became a home. The evening ended with the little girl asleep in Savannah's arms, while Spencer sat quietly, recognizing that something inside the house was changing. It wasn't only Savannah's presence, but the way she was stitching together new forms of togetherness, turning the routine into something more human and far less lonely. Life inside the mansion no longer resembled the days before Savannah's arrival. Lily woke calling her name, spent her afternoons lost in games and made-up stories, and fell asleep more peacefully after hearing her voice reading a tale. The governess, relieved to share the responsibility, dedicated herself to her household tasks with renewed energy, and even the other staff whispered that the house felt lighter. Spencer, for his part, watched everything in silence. The relentless executive who once kept his distance now observed the tangible results of Savannah's presence. His daughter smiled more. The mansion no longer felt like a cold shell, and the solitude that had surrounded him seemed to be unraveling, little by little. He never said it out loud, but he knew Savannah had become indispensable. That particular night, Lily resisted sleep, insisting on one more story. Savannah sat at the edge of the bed, holding the book open, while the little girl, curled around her stuffed bunny, fought off drowsiness. Spencer stood in the doorway, watching. Savannah's soft voice filled the room, each word wrapping the air in comfort that went beyond the story itself. When Lily finally closed her eyes and exhaled into rest, Savannah shut the book gently and pulled the blanket up over her. The brief look she cast toward the father carried a quiet understanding, as though they shared a secret. The child was safe, loved, whole. Spencer turned off the light, closed the door carefully, and together they went downstairs. The mansion felt suspended in a rare moment of stillness. In the smaller sitting room, toys were scattered across the rug. Savannah began to pick them up, but Spencer stepped forward, kneeling beside her to help. The sight clashed with the man, who usually delegated everything to staff. "You don't have to." "I'll do it," she said, surprised. He lifted his eyes to hers and answered softly, "I want to help. I think I've overlooked the small things for too long." The silence that followed carried something different, an intimacy that required no explanation. When their hands brushed while reaching for the same block, Savannah stilled, her fingers lingering against his longer than necessary. The simple gesture felt more powerful than any conversation. Spencer rose first and extended a hand to help her up. Savannah accepted, feeling the warmth and steadiness that clashed with the cold image she had once held of him. Now they stood, face to face, too close to ignore. He drew in a breath, his voice low and raw with sincerity. "You've changed this house. You've changed Lily, and you've changed me too." Savannah's eyes widened, her heartbeat racing, but she didn't pull away. "I only tried to do what felt right," she whispered. Spencer shook his head, stepping closer. "No, you brought life where there was none." His gaze was intense, vulnerable, and resolute all at once. The space between them dissolved in seconds. Spencer lifted his hand to her face, his fingers grazing her skin before drawing her closer with gentle firmness. The kiss came unhurried, yet it carried all the tension that had built over the past days. Savannah responded, closing her eyes, letting herself be pulled into that unexpected surrender. The weight of long shifts at the restaurant, the exhaustion of endless responsibilities, all of it melted away in that instant. Within that kiss was a promise of a shared path, not merely of employer and employee, but of two people who, against all odds, had found in each other what neither had been searching for. When they finally pulled apart, still close, Savannah kept her eyes lowered until Spencer tipped her chin gently. "I don't want you to think this was impulse. I want you here, not just for Lily, for me too." She smiled shyly, but the certainty in her eyes was unmistakable. "I want to stay." That simple answer was enough. No further words were needed. The sitting room, once a place marked by formality, now felt like the heart of a home. Upstairs, Lily slept soundly, and downstairs, two adults sealed a choice that would transform their lives. That night, as Savannah lay in her bed, she no longer felt like a visitor. The kiss still burned on her lips, and Spencer's gaze lingered in her mind. Deep down, there was no more doubt. Their lives, once divided between such distant worlds, were beginning to stitch together into one. And though there were no grand promises, there was clarity. Everything from now on would be shared. The end. So, what did you think of this story? Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to keep enjoying stories like this one. See you next time.